My sister told me not to come to her rehearsal dinner. She said her fiancé's father was a federal judge, and they couldn't risk me embarrassing them. What she didn't know was that when he walked into that restaurant, he looked at me, smiled, and called me, Your Honor. And the sound of her fork hitting the plate was louder than anything I could have said. I never thought silence could be so loud. But the night my sister's fiance's father walked into that restaurant and called me Your Honor, the silence around that table felt like thunder. And the truth is, that moment didn't begin at the dinner. It began weeks earlier, with a single message, a single sentence. A single sentence, a single reminder that sometimes the people who underestimate you are the ones who share your last name. My name is Stella. I'm 27 years old, and until recently, I was the quiet one in the family. Not the troublemaker, not the dramatic one, not the favorite, just the quiet one. My sister, Amelia, was different. She was the golden child, the planner, the one who always knew exactly what to say and when to say it. Teachers loved her, relatives praised her, family friends used her as an example. Why can't you be more like Amelia? I heard that sentence more times than I can count, and after a while, I stopped trying to compete. Silence became easier. Silence doesn't get compared. Silence doesn't get judged. Silence survives. When Amelia got engaged, the entire family exploded with excitement. Our group chat became chaos overnight. Venue options, bridesmaid dresses, color palettes. Her fiancé, Jason, came from what she called a very respected family. That phrase came up a lot. Very respected. His father was a federal judge. And somehow, that fact became the center of every conversation. He's incredibly powerful. He knows everyone. This wedding has to be perfect. I mostly stayed out of it. I sent short congratulations, polite emojis, smiley faces that didn't reveal much. Because here's the thing. I've spent years building a life outside of my family's expectations. A life that didn't need validation at Sunday dinners. A life I never felt the need to explain, and I was okay with that. At least I thought I was. Then, one afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was Amelia. Not in the group chat. Private message. And something about that already felt heavy. I opened it. Hey, quick thing. Don't come to the rehearsal dinner. I stared at the screen. I thought maybe I read it wrong. Then the second message came through. Jason's dad is a federal judge. We can't have you embarrassing us. I don't know what I expected. Maybe a joke, maybe a follow-up saying she was kidding. But nothing came. Just those words. We can't have you embarrassing us. I didn't feel angry at first. I felt small, like I had just been quietly placed into a category I didn't agree to sigh. Embarrassing? Because what? Digit, because I'm not loud. Because I don't flaunt my life. Because I don't share every detail of my career over mashed potatoes at Thanksgiving? I read the message again. Jason's dad is a federal judge. Jason's dad is a federal judge. As if that explained everything. As if power only moved in one direction. As if importance belonged to one side of the table. I typed a response. Deleted it. Tipped again. Deleted that too. And finally, I did what I've always done best. I stayed silent. Because sometimes silence says more than defense ever could. The days after that message felt different. Not explosive. Not dramatic. Just colder. I skipped 2 family dinners. Told my parents I was busy with work. Which wasn't a lie. But it wasn't the full truth either. The full truth was that something inside me had shifted. I realized that my sister didn't just misunderstand me had shifted. I realized that my sister didn't just misunderstand me. And maybe she never tried to. You see, I've always kept my professional life separate, not out of shame, not out of secrecy, but because I learned early that in my family, comparison grows faster than support. If you share too much success, it becomes competition. If you share too little, it becomes suspicion. So I chose privacy. Peace over praise, distance over drama, and I built something meaningful in that quiet, something earned, something real. But to Amelia, my silence looked like insignificance. And that's the part that stung. The engagement dinner arrived faster than I expected. I considered not going. Her message still echoed in my head. We can't have you embarrassing us. We can't have you embarrassing us. but my parents called the night before. It would mean a lot if you came, my mom said gently, so I agreed. Not to prove anything, not to make a statement. But because part of me still hoped we could pretend that text message never happened, that maybe it was just stress, wedding pressure, insecurity, something temporary. The restaurant was exactly the kind of place Amelia would choose: soft lighting, crystal glasses, polished silverware placed with surgical precision, the kind of room where laughter stays controlled, where posture matters, where appearances are currency. I arrived early. I always do. I chose a seat toward the end of the table, not hiding, not center stage, just present. Relatives trickled in. Hugs, air kisses, compliments about Amelia's dress. Jason walked in with a confident smile. He shook hands firmly, spoke loudly. He glanced at me briefly. Polite nod. Nothing more. Amelia entered last, radiant, composed, glowing in that way brides-to-be often do. But when her eyes landed on me, something flickered. Surprise. Then tension. She hadn't expected me to come, and for a second, I wondered if I should have stayed home. She sat beside Jason, didn't greet me, didn't acknowledge me, just jumped into conversation, talking about seating charts, talking about guest lists, talking about how important tonight was. Jason's dad, Shay. Old be here any minute, she said, smoothing her dress. And there it was again, that tone, pride mixed with nervousness, like she was hosting royalty. Everyone straightened a little. Everyone straightened a little, even my parents. And I sat there quietly, hands folded in my lap, listening, observing, being evaluated without anyone saying it out loud. Behave. Blend in. Don't stand out. That was the unspoken rule. And the energy changed instantly. You could feel it. Conversations slowed. Chairs paused mid-scrape. A wave of attention moved across the room. A man stepped inside. Calm, confident, not flashy. But commanding, not because he demanded attention, but because he didn't need to. Someone whispered, "That must be him." Amelia straightened instantly. Jason stood up. Smiles widened. Voices softened. The man greeted a few relatives. Firm handshake. Polite nod. And then his eyes met mine. For a split second, something passed between us. Recognition. Real recognition. Not curiosity. Recognition. He stopped walking. The room felt like it inhaled all at once. And then he smiled. Warm. Respectful. And said clearly, "Judge Rivera." The sound of Amelia's fork hitting her plate was sharper than it should have been. Metal against porcelain. Clink. Every head turned toward me. Confusion spread like spilled wine across a white tablecloth. Judge Rivera. I didn't move right away. I didn't rush to explain. I didn't laugh it off. I simply met his gaze and nodded, as if this were the most normal greeting in the world. Because to me, it was. And in that moment, the story my sister had been telling about me collapsed, silently, right there between the appetizers and the main course. And what nobody at that table understood yet was that this was only the beginning. Because titles may command attention, but truth resets the entire room. And that night, the room was about to reset. I never thought silence could be so loud. But the night my sister's fiancé's father walked into that restaurant and called me, "Your Honor," the silence around that table felt like thunder. And the truth is, that moment didn't begin at the dinner. It began weeks earlier, with a single message, a single sentence, a single sentence, a single reminder that sometimes the people who underestimate you are the ones who share your last name. My name is Stella. I'm 27 years old. And until recently, I was the quiet one in the family. Not the troublemaker. Not the dramatic one. Not the favorite. Just the quiet one. My sister, Amelia, was different. She was the golden child. The planner. The one who always knew exactly what to say and when to say it. Teachers loved her. Relatives praised her. Family friends used her as an example. "Why can't you be more like Amelia?" I heard that sentence more times than I can count. And after a while, I stopped trying to compete. Silence became easier. Silence doesn't get compared. Silence doesn't get judged. Silence survives. When Amelia got engaged, the entire family exploded with excitement. Our group chat became chaos overnight. Venue options, bridesmaid dresses, guest lists, color palettes. Her fiancé Jason came from what she called a very respected family. That phrase came up a lot. Very respected. His father was a federal judge, and somehow that fact became the center of every conversation. He's incredibly powerful. He knows everyone. This wedding has to be perfect. I mostly stayed out of it. I sent short congratulations, polite emojis, smiley faces that didn't reveal much. Because here's the thing, I've spent years building a life outside of my family's expectations. A life that didn't need validation at Sunday dinners. A life I never felt the need to explain. And I was okay with that. At least I thought I was. Then one afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was Amelia, not in the group chat, private message. And something about that already felt heavy. I opened it. Hey, quick thing, don't come to the rehearsal dinner. I stared at the screen. I thought maybe I read it wrong. Then the second message came through. Jason's dad is a federal judge. We can't have you embarrassing us. I don't know what I expected. Maybe a joke, maybe a follow-up saying she was kidding. But nothing came. Just those words. We can't have you embarrassing us. I didn't feel angry at first. I felt small, like I had just been quietly placed into a category I didn't agree to, but embarrassing. Because what, Dibit? Because I'm not loud. Because I don't flaunt my life, because I don't share every detail of my career over mashed potatoes at Thanksgiving. I read the message again. Jason's dad is a federal judge. Jason's dad is a federal judge. As if that explained everything. As if power only moved in one direction. As if importance belonged to one side of the table. I typed a response, deleted it. David. Typed again. Deleted that too. And finally, I did what I've always done best. I stayed silent. Because sometimes silence says more than defense ever could. The days after that message felt different. Not explosive, not dramatic, just colder. I skipped 2 family dinners, told my parents I was busy with work. Which wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the full truth either. The full truth was that something inside me had shifted. I realized that my sister didn't just misunderstand me, had shifted. I realized that my sister didn't just misunderstand me. And maybe she never tried to. You see, I've always kept my professional life separate. Not out of shame, not out of secrecy, but because I learned early that in my family, comparison grows faster than support. If you share too much success, it becomes competition. If you share too little, it becomes suspicion. So I chose privacy, peace over praise, distance over drama, and I built something meaningful in that quiet. Something earned, something real. But to Amelia, my silence looked like insignificance. And that's the part that stung. The engagement dinner arrived faster than I expected. I considered not going. Her message still echoed in my head. We can't have you embarrassing us. We can't have you embarrassing us. But my parents called the night before. It would mean a lot if you came, my mom said gently. So I agreed. Not to prove anything. Not to make a statement. But because part of me still hoped we could pretend that text message never happened, that maybe it was just stress, wedding pressure, insecurity, something temporary. The restaurant was exactly the kind of place Amelia would choose. Soft lighting, crystal glasses, polished silverware placed with surgical precision, the kind of room where laughter stays controlled, where posture matters, where appearances are currency. I arrived early. I always do. I chose a seat toward the end of the table, not hiding, not center stage, just present. Relatives trickled in, hugs, air kisses, compliments about Amelia's dress. Jason walked in with a confident smile. He shook hands firmly, spoke loudly. He glanced at me briefly, polite nod. Nothing more. Amelia entered last, radiant, composed, glowing in that way brides-to-be often do. But when her eyes landed on me, something flickered. Surprise. Then tension. She hadn't expected me to come. And for a second, I wondered if I should have stayed home. She sat beside Jason, didn't greet me, didn't acknowledge me. Just jumped into conversation. talking about seating charts, talking about seating charts, talking about how important tonight was. Jason's dad says, "Old be here any minute," she said, smoothing her dress. And there it was again, that tone. Pride mixed with nervousness, like she was hosting royalty. Everyone straightened a little, even my parents, and I sat there quietly, hands folded in my lap, listening, observing, being evaluated without anyone saying it out loud. Behave, blend in, don't stand out. That was the unspoken rule. Then the door opened, and the energy changed instantly. You could feel it. Conversation slowed. You could feel it. Conversation slowed. Chairs paused mid-scrape, a wave of attention moved across the room. A man stepped inside, calm, confident, not flashy, not because he demanded attention, but because he didn't need to. Someone whispered, "That must be him." Amelia straightened instantly. Jason stood up, smiles widened, voices softened. The man greeted a few relatives. Firm handshake, polite nod, and then his eyes met mine. For a split second, something passed between us recognition. Real recognition, not confusion, not curiosity. Recognition. He stopped walking. The room felt like it inhaled all at once. And then he smiled. Warm, respectful, and said clearly, with the "and" of Amelia's fork hitting. Her plate was sharper than it should have been, metal against porcelain. Clink. Every head turned toward me. Confusion spread like spilled wine across a white tablecloth. Oath. Judge Rivera. I didn't move right away. I didn't rush to explain. I didn't laugh it off. I simply met his gaze and nodded as if this were the most normal greeting in the world. Because to me, it was Haim in that moment. The story my sister had been telling about me collapsed, silently, right there between the appetizers and the main course. And what nobody at that table understood yet was that this was only the beginning. Because titles may command attention, but truth resets the entire room, and that night, the room was about to reset. When my sister asked to meet, she didn't suggest a fancy restaurant. She didn't suggest bringing Jason. She didn't even suggest our parents' house. She chose a small cafe downtown, the kind of place we used to go when we were teenagers, back when our biggest fights were about borrowed clothes and who got the front seat in the car. That choice told me something. This wasn't about image. This was about memory. And maybe about honesty. I arrived a few minutes early. Old habit, the cafe hadn't changed much. Soft music, wooden tables, the smell of coffee that somehow feels comforting even if you don't drink it. I chose a corner table, neutral ground. When Amelia walked in, I noticed the difference immediately. No polished posture, no perfect smile, no performance. She looked tired, not physically, emotionally. She spotted me and hesitated for half a second before walking over. "Hi," she said softly. "Hi." We sat down, and for a moment neither of us spoke. The silence between sisters is different from other silences. It's layered. History, rivalry, shared childhood, unspoken comparisons. She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup but didn't drink it. "I'm sorry," she said finally. No build-up, no excuses, just those two words, and I could tell right away. This wasn't about the dinner. It was about something older. It was about something older. "I shouldn't have sent that message," she continued. "About the rehearsal dinner." I watched her carefully. She wasn't defensive. She wasn't angry. She was embarrassed. "I was stressed," she added quickly. "Everything felt like it had to be perfect. Jason's family is different from ours. They have expectations." I tilted my head slightly. "So you thought I was a risk?" I asked gently. She winced. "When you say it like that, how else should I say it?" She looked down. "I didn't know what you'd say, or how you'd act. You've always been unpredictable." I almost laughed. Unpredictable. I almost laughed. Unpredictable. "I barely talk at family dinners. That's what I mean," she said quickly. "You never say much. And then when you do, it's sharp. Or smart. Or something that makes people uncomfortable." There it was. Intimidation. "Amelia," I said calmly, "do you know why I don't say much?" She shook her head slowly. Because growing up, every time I spoke about something I was proud of, it turned into comparison. Her eyes lifted to meet mine. Remember when I won that debate competition in high school? She frowned slightly, trying to recall. You told Aunt Maria it wasn't a big deal, because it was just a school event. She blinked. I was 14, she said defensively. Yes, I agreed. And I was 12. And I remember it. Silence. I wasn't attacking her. I wasn't raising my voice. I was simply laying out pieces of memory she may have forgotten. But that's small stuff, she said after a moment. It wasn't small to me. She leaned back in her chair, absorbing that. And when I got into law school, I continued. You joked that at least one of us would marry rich, and one of us would work forever. Her face flushed. I was kidding. I know, I said softly, but jokes build narratives, especially repeated ones. She stared at her coffee. I didn't realize it stayed with you. Of course it did, because words, even casual ones, don't disappear just because the speaker forgets them. The cafe around us continued normally, people typing on laptops, cups clinking, quiet conversations. But at our table, something deeper was unfolding. I think I was scared, Amelia admitted after a long pause. Of what? She hesitated. Of not measuring up. That wasn't what I expected. You. I asked quietly. She gave a small, humorless smile. Do you know what it's like being the golden one your whole life? I blinked. I thought you liked it. I did, she said. At first. But after a while, it becomes a role you have to keep performing. That sentence landed differently. You were the quiet one, she continued. No one expected anything dramatic from you. But from me, I had to stay impressive. And when I became a judge, I asked carefully. She swallowed. It felt like the ground shifted. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Because now the truth was clearer. This wasn't about embarrassment at a rehearsal dinner. It was about control. Control of the narrative. Control of identity. If you were successful quietly, she said, then what was I? I studied her face. You were still you, I replied. My success didn't erase yours, but it felt like it did, she whispered. And there it was, the real wound. Not rivalry. Fear. I never told you because I didn't want that shift, I said honestly. I didn't want family dinners to turn into silent comparisons. They already were, she admitted quietly. That surprised me. What do you mean? She sighed. Every time you weren't there, someone would ask where you were, what you were doing. If you were too important for us now, I frowned. I never said that. I know, she said quickly. But your absence felt big. And I didn't understand why you were pulling away. I thought about that. Maybe my silence had protected me, but it had also created distance. Distance. That she filled with assumptions. So when I started talking about Jason's dad, she continued slowly. I think I was trying to feel secure, like I had something powerful. I nodded slightly, and then I assumed I was a threat too. That? She didn't answer immediately. Yes, she said finally. I thought if you came to the rehearsal dinner and somehow outshined everything, it would ruin the balance. Balance, that word again. Family dynamics are strange like that. Everyone plays a role. And when someone evolves, the whole structure shakes. I wasn't trying to outshine you, I said gently. I just wanted to attend your wedding as your sister. Tears gathered in her eyes. Then why didn't you ask me about my life? I asked quietly. She wiped her cheek quickly. Because I was afraid of the answer. That honesty mattered more than any apology. We sat there for a long time, not arguing, not competing, just unraveling years of quiet tension. I don't want us to be rivals, she said finally. We don't have to be, I replied. But I need to know something, she added carefully. Why didn't you ever correct me when I minimized your career in front of people? I thought about that, because I didn't need their validation, I said honestly. And I didn't want to embarrass you. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. You protected me. Yes, that realization seemed to hit her hard. You could have exposed me at dinner, she said. When Judge Harrison called you Your Honor, you could have said something sharp, something humiliating. I didn't need to, I replied calmly. The first truth did that on its own. She let out a shaky breath. "I'm proud of you," she said quietly. And this time, it felt different from our parents' words. This wasn't delayed pride. This was humbled pride. "Thank you," I said. "And I'm sorry," she added again. "Not just for the message, for the years." I nodded slowly. "I forgive you, but forgiveness doesn't erase history overnight. It resets intention." Before we left, she asked one more question. "Are you coming to the rehearsal dinner?" I considered it. Weeks ago, she had told me not to come. Now she was asking. The power dynamic had shifted. But this wasn't about proving anything anymore. "No," I said gently. Her face fell slightly. "Why?" "Because you asked me not to," I said, "and I think we both need to respect that boundary." She studied me. "That's fair. I'll be at the wedding," I added. "As your sister. Nothing more, nothing less." A small smile formed on her face. "Nothing less," she repeated softly. As we walked out of the cafe together, the air felt lighter, not magically fixed, but honest. And honesty is stronger than perfection. In the days that followed, something subtle changed. She stopped mentioning Jason's father in every conversation. She asked me about work, carefully, genuinely. Not to compare, to understand. And I answered. Not to impress, to share. The wedding day I arrived quietly. No drama, no tension, just anticipation. When I entered the venue, people greeted me differently. But this time, I didn't feel uncomfortable. Because the shift wasn't built on surprise anymore. It was built on awareness. Jason's father approached me during the reception. "Good to see you again, Your Honor," he said politely. And I noticed something important. Amelia didn't flinch. She smiled. Proudly, not because of the title, but because she finally understood the person behind it. But what none of us realized yet was that growth invites new challenges. And sometimes when balance resets, other people struggle with the change. Because the wedding wasn't the end of this story. It was the calm before the next test. And this time, the challenge wouldn't come from my sister. It would come from someone who didn't appreciate the shift in power at all. The wedding should have been the end of it. A clean reset, a quiet understanding between sisters. A lesson learned and tucked away. And for a few hours, it felt that way. The ceremony was beautiful, soft music, white flowers, the kind of vows that make people tear up even if they pretend not to. Amelia looked radiant walking down the aisle. Not perfect, not performing, just happy. And when she glanced at me from the altar, there was something new in her eyes. Not tension, not comparison. Gratitude. I smiled back, because whatever had cracked between us at that dinner had been acknowledged, not fully repaired, but no longer ignored. That mattered. The reception was larger than I expected. Jason's family had influence. That much was obvious. City officials, business owners, lawyers, people who spoke with measured confidence and shook hands like agreements were always hiding in their palms. I moved quietly through the crowd. Not hiding, just observing. It's a habit you develop in courtrooms. You learn more when you listen than when you speak. Jason's father, Judge Harrison, approached me near the bar. "Your Honor," he said warmly, extending his hand again. I shook it. "It's good to see you outside of a courtroom," he added. "And good to see you without a docket," I replied lightly. He chuckled. But as we spoke briefly about work, I noticed something over his shoulder. Jason, watching, his smile was polite, but it didn't reach his eyes. And that's when I realized the shift at that dinner hadn't affected everyone equally. Jason had built a narrative too. In his version, he was marrying into a simple family, a supportive but unimpressive one. He was the one bringing prestige into the room. His father was the pillar, the symbol, the elevated standard. And suddenly, that dynamic had changed. Not publicly, not dramatically, but enough to unsettle someone who values hierarchy. Later in the evening, he approached me directly. "Can we talk?" he asked. His tone was friendly, too friendly. "Of course," I said. We stepped onto the outdoor terrace where the music softened behind us. City lights shimmered in the distance. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "I have to admit," he began, adjusting his cufflinks, I was surprised at dinner. I imagine you were, I replied calmly. You never mentioned your position, he said. I wasn't aware I needed to. A small pause. He smiled again, but this time it tightened. It's just, transparency is important in families. There it was, not accusation, but implication. You're concerned I wasn't transparent? I asked evenly. I think, he said carefully, that when two families merge, there shouldn't be hidden variables. Hidden variables. Interesting phrase. I didn't hide anything, I said. You never asked. He exhaled slightly through his nose. That answer seems familiar. It should, I replied, because his wife had said the same thing. He leaned against the railing, studying me. He leaned against the railing, studying me. You understand how this changes things, he said quietly. Does it? Of course it does, he replied. Power dynamics matter. There it was again. Power. Always power. Always power. I tilted my head slightly. Jason, I said calmly, if a title changes how you treat someone, that says more about you than it does about the title. His jaw tightened. That's not what I mean. Then explain what you mean. For a second, he didn't answer. And in that silence, I saw it clearly. He wasn't upset that I was a judge. He was unsettled that I was equal. My father has a reputation, he said finally. People respect him. As they should. I agreed. And now, he continued, people will compare. That word again. It seemed to echo through every layer of this family. Compare what? I asked softly. Our careers, our influence, our standing. I almost smiled. You think marriage is a competition? I asked. He hesitated. No. But you think respect is limited? He didn't respond, because that was the real issue. In his world, respect was a ladder. Someone had to stand higher, and he was used to being closer to the top. I didn't attend your wedding to shift anything, I said gently. I came because my sister invited me. He studied my face. And yet you shifted it anyway. That wasn't my doing. No, he said quietly. It was your existence. That sentence lingered between us. Because it wasn't hostile. It was honest. Inside the reception hall, applause erupted as Amelia prepared to toss the bouquet. Jason glanced toward the sound. She looks happy, I said. She is, he replied quickly. Then let's keep it that way. He looked back at me. What's that supposed to mean? It means, I said calmly, that insecurity only grows if you feed it. His expression hardened slightly. You think I'm insecure? I think you're adjusting. Another pause. The music swelled again inside. Guests laughing. Glasses clinking. Life moving forward. You're very composed, he said. I have to be. Is that what being a judge does? He asked. No, I replied softly. It's what being underestimated does. That one landed. He straightened. I'm not your opponent, he said. I never said you were. But you speak like I am. Only because you approached me like I was one. Silence. The kind that forces reflection. And Ben, for a brief moment I saw uncertainty flicker in his eyes. Because confrontation isn't comfortable when you're used to admiration. We'll see each other at family events, he said finally. I'd prefer things to remain smooth. They will, I assured him. As long as there's no competition where none exists. He nodded once, short, controlled, and we walked back inside together, side by side, not allies, not enemies, something undefined. The rest of the evening passed without incident, but I felt it, a subtle tension beneath the celebration, not from Amelia, from Jason. He laughed a little louder than necessary when speaking about his father's achievements. He mentioned prestigious contacts more than once, and every time someone acknowledged my title, he shifted slightly. Tiny reactions, but visible if you know how to observe. And I do. When the reception ended, Amelia hugged me tightly. Thank you for coming, she whispered. I wouldn't have missed it, I replied. She pulled back and searched my face. Everything okay? She asked softly. I considered the question. Yes, I said honestly. Just adjusting. She nodded slowly. Me too. And for the first time in years, I believed we were on the same side. But marriage doesn't just join two people, it joins dynamics, egos, histories, and the days that followed proved that not everyone adapts gracefully. A week after the wedding, I received a call. Not from Amelia, not from my parents, from a colleague. Have you heard? He asked. Heard what? There's talk. About a potential ethics review. My stomach tightened slightly. Regarding what? Wiki hesitated. Your conduct at a recent public event. Public event. My mind scanned quickly court appearances, legal conferences. Then it clicked the wedding. That's absurd, I said calmly. I agree, he replied. But the complaint is formal. Complaint. Formal. Those words don't float casually in my profession. They stick. They're questioning whether your presence created a perceived conflict of interest. I closed my eyes briefly, and suddenly, Jason's words replayed in my mind. Power dynamics matter. We'll see each other at family events. Transparency is important. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Because this wasn't insecurity anymore. This was strategy. Who filed it? I asked quietly. There was a pause on the other end. It came anonymously. Of course it did. Anonymous complaints are easy, clean. Cowardly? I'll handle it, I said steadily. I know you will, my colleague replied, but as I ended the call, one thought crystallized. Someone wasn't adjusting. Someone was reacting. And if this was an attempt to destabilize me, they had underestimated something crit. Écoutez, I don't panic under pressure. I prepare. And this time, silence would not be my only strategy. When you work in law, you learn something early. Reputation is fragile. It doesn't shatter loudly. It cracks quietly. A whisper here, a whisper here, a doubt there, a question framed as concern. An anonymous ethics complaint isn't a scream, it's a seed. And if you ignore it, it grows. I didn't panic after the call. Panic clouds judgment. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table that night with a notebook and wrote down 3 things. Who benefits from this complaint? What exactly is being implied? What is the cleanest way to dismantle it? Judges don't defend themselves emotionally. They defend themselves structurally. The allegation, as explained to me later in writing, was subtle. It claimed that my public association at a high-profile private event could create a perceived conflict of interest due to shared professional circles. On paper, it sounded procedural, responsible, even. But I could read between the lines. The event referenced Divey, my sister's wedding, and the shared professional circle, Judge Harrison, Jason's father. The implication was simple, that my presence at the wedding could somehow influence future rulings involving his network. It was thin, weak, but dangerous if framed correctly, because in my profession, perception matters almost as much as truth. I requested a formal copy of the complaint. When it arrived, I read it slowly, twice, then a third time. No direct accusations, no claims of misconduct, just carefully worded doubt. Whoever wrote it understood the system, understood how to phrase things to trigger review without appearing malicious. That narrowed the list. This wasn't random. This was intentional. I thought about Jason on the terrace. Power dynamics matter. Transparency is important. You shifted things. At the time, his words felt defensive. Now they felt predictive. But here's the mistake people make when they try to intimidate someone who's built their career on scrutiny. They assume fear. They assume retreat. They assume the quiet one will shrink. They forget that silence can observe longer than ego can plan. The next morning, I requested a voluntary meeting with the ethics board. Not required. Voluntary. That alone sends a message. When you walk into review willingly, you don't look guilty, you look confident. 3 members sat across from me in a small conference room. Professional. Neutral. We appreciate your cooperation, one of them began. Of course, I replied calmly. Transparency protects everyone. I watched their pens pause slightly. Words matter. I'd like to clarify something immediately, I continued. I attended a family wedding. I did not discuss pending cases. I did not engage in professional negotiation. And I did not seek any advantage. They nodded. We understand, another said. But optics are strongest when assumptions are weak, I replied gently. Then I presented something simple, a disclosure log. I had already documented my presence at the wedding in my private records the day after it happened. Names, conversations, duration of interactions, not because I expected a complaint, but because I understand perception. Preparation isn't paranoia, it's discipline. They reviewed my documentation, and slowly the tone shifted from cautious to respectful. One board member leaned back in his chair. This appears thorough, he admitted. It is, I said. Do you believe the complaint was made in good faith? There it was. The real question. I paused. Good faith is difficult to measure anonymously, I replied evenly. But I believe it stemmed from discomfort rather than misconduct. He studied me. You're not requesting an investigation into the source. No, that surprised them. Why not? Another asked, because I already knew the answer. Because dragging it into daylight would humiliate my sister, indirectly. Because escalation benefits no one. And because sometimes the most powerful response is composure. I prefer resolution over retaliation, I said calmly. And that was true. But resolution doesn't mean passivity. The review closed quickly. Insufficient grounds. No action required. Complaint dismissed. Officially, it was over. Unofficially, neffity. It had just begun because whoever filed it now knew two things. 1. I wasn't rattled. 2. I was prepared. And insecure people rarely stop after one failed attempt. 3 days later, Amelia called. Her voice sounded strained. Did someone file something against you? She asked. I didn't ask how she knew. I already suspected, yes, I said calmly. A long silence followed. Jason's been tense all week, she admitted. He won't say why. That confirmed enough. I handled it, I said. What does that mean? It means it's finished. Another pause. Was it because of the wedding? Yes. Her breath caught softly. Stella, I swear I didn't know. I believe you. And I did. Because insecurity often hides its actions from the very people it claims to protect. That evening, she came over unannounced. She looked angry, not at me, at him. He admitted it, she said as soon as I opened the door. Admitted what? That he expressed concern to someone about professional overlap. Expressed concern, that's one way to phrase it. Did he file it directly? I asked. He won't say, but he said he had to protect optics. I almost smiled at the hard irony. Protect optics. From a wedding. Why? She demanded. Why would he do that? Because control feels safer than equality, I said quietly. She stared at me. You think he feels threatened? I think he's adjusting poorly. She paced my living room. I married him, she whispered. What does this mean? It means he made a mistake, I said calmly. What matters is what he does next. And what if he doubles down? That was the real fear, not the complaint. The character behind it. The next family dinner was tense. Jason was polite, measured. Almost overly so. Judge Harrison greeted me as usual, unaware of the ripple beneath the surface. But when Jason and I finally spoke privately again, it wasn't on a terrace. It was direct. You filed that complaint, I said calmly. He didn't deny it. I raised a concern. You tried to undermine me. I tried to protect perception. At my expense. He held my gaze. You shifted balance, he said again. And there it was. Still about balance. Still about hierarchy. I didn't shift anything, I replied evenly. Your expectations did. He looked away first, and that told me everything. Withdraw it, Amelia had demanded earlier. I can't, he had told her. It's anonymous. Convenient. But unnecessary now. Because it was already dismissed. And here's the thing about failed intimidation. It exposes weakness, not strength. Word travels quietly in professional circles. Not about the complaint, about how it was handled. Composure earns respect faster than confrontation. And soon, invitations increased. Panels, speaking engagements, legal forums, not because of the wedding, because of how I responded afterward. One evening, Amelia called again. He apologized. she said quietly. To you, to me, and indirectly to you. He said he miscalculated. I nodded to myself. Finally, honesty. He's not used to sharing space, she admitted. No, I said gently. He's used to occupying it. Silence. I don't want a marriage built on insecurity, she whispered. Then don't allow it to be. Growth isn't automatic, it's negotiated, and for the first time she wasn't negotiating with me. She was negotiating within her own marriage. A week later, Jason requested a meeting. Not defensive, not confrontational. Humbled? I was wrong, he said plainly. That's a rare sentence from someone like him. I let pride make a decision for me, he continued, and I crossed a line. I studied him. Why tell me this? I asked. Because I respect what you didn't do, he admitted. And what's that? You didn't retaliate. He was right. I could have filed a counter-inquiry. He was right. I could have filed a counter-inquiry, raised questions about intent, exposed the timeline. But revenge satisfies ego. Strategy preserves reputation. I don't need to compete with you, he said finally. That's good, I replied calmly, because I was never competing. And for the first time since that dinner, I believed him when he nodded. Power isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to dominate a room. It stands steady, unmoved by insecurity, unthreatened by comparison. And as I sat alone that night, reflecting on everything, the text message, the dinner, the complaint, the apology, I realized something important. The real revenge wasn't exposure. It wasn't humiliation. It wasn't retaliation. It was composure, because nothing unsettles insecurity more than someone who refuses to shrink or attack and simply stands, unshaken. But even then, I didn't know the final test was still ahead, because family dynamics don't shift once, they evolve, and the next evolution would challenge more than just pride. If this story were about revenge, it would have ended there. An apology, a lesson learned, an insecure man humbled. But real life doesn't wrap itself neatly after one confrontation, especially when pride has been bruised in public, and Jason's pride had been bruised, not destroyed, not exposed, but dented. And dents have a way of resurfacing when pressure builds. A month passed quietly. No new complaints, no strange calls, no professional tension. At family dinners, Jason was controlled, measured, almost overly respectful. He asked about my work carefully. He avoided comparisons. He stopped mentioning his father's connections every 5 minutes. From the outside, everything looked balanced. But I've learned something in courtrooms. But I've learned something in courtrooms. When someone overcorrects, they're still adjusting. Not settled, adjusting. And adjustant. And adjustant can go either way. The real test came unexpectedly. It started with a case, a development project on the edge of the city. A major investment, high stakes, public interest involved, and one of the firms quietly backing the project, Diavich, a financial group closely connected to Jason's extended business circle, not illegal, not improper, just adjacent, close enough to raise eyebrows, far enough to avoid direct violation. When the case file landed on my desk, I felt the shift immediately, because perception matters. And now perception had teeth. I could have recused myself immediately. That would have been the safest route, the quietest. No risk. But recusal without necessity can also create a narrative. It can imply guilt where none exists. So I did what I always do. I reviewed the facts, line by line. Ownership structures, partnership layers, legal standing. Jason was not involved. Judge Harrison was not involved. There was no direct conflict. Professionally, I was clear. But personally, I was clear. But personally, this would test something deeper. That evening, Amelia called. You got the development case, didn't you? She asked quietly. Yes. Jason had already told her. He's nervous, she admitted. About what? About what people might say. I exhaled slowly. What do you think? I asked her. She hesitated. I think you'll do your job. That answer mattered more than she realized. Later that night, Jason requested to speak, not confrontational, not tense. just cautious. I heard you're presiding over the Riverside case, he said. I am. Bam. He nodded slowly. I want to be clear, he added. I have no involvement. I know. He paused. But if this creates complications for you, it won't. I interrupted gently. People talk, he said. They always do. And if the ruling affects someone in my circle, it will affect them based on law. I replied calmly, not on marriage. He studied my face. You won't recuse yourself? Should I? I asked evenly. He didn't answer, because the truth was simple. Recusal would imply influence, and I refused to bend law for optics. The hearings began 2 weeks later. Public interest was high, reporters scanning for angles, and I knew exactly what some of them were watching. Not the legal arguments, not the environmental impact reports. Me, looking for bias, looking for favoritism, looking for weakness. They found none. Because professionalism is louder than rumor, during one recess I noticed something. Jason sitting quietly in the back row, not with investors, not with his father, alone. He wasn't there to intimidate. He was there to witness, and maybe to measure himself against his own fear. Our eyes met briefly, no hostility, no tension, just awareness. This was the real test, not the complaint, not the apology, this. Over several days, evidence unfolded, environmental risks understated, community impact minimized, financial projections inflated. The development wasn't illegal, but it was careless, and carelessness at that scale affects thousands. When closing arguments ended, the courtroom felt heavy. Everyone knew the decision would shape more than a project. It would shape reputations, mine included. That night, I didn't sleep much. Not because I doubted the law, but because I understood the boat's ripple of out. If I ruled against the development, whispers would surface. If I ruled in favor, different whispers would surface. But here's the truth about integrity. You cannot control interpretation, only intention. So I reviewed the evidence again. Then I wrote the ruling. Line by line, grounded, measured, unemotional, undemotional, and clear. The development would proceed only under strict revised conditions. Environmental safeguards strengthened. Financial transparency mandated. Community protections enforced. It wasn't a denial. It wasn't blind approval. It was accountability. Balanced, firm, defensible. The courtroom was silent as I read the decision aloud. Reporters scribbled. Attorneys exchanged glances. Investors calculated impact. And when I finished, I didn't look toward Jason. I didn't look toward anyone. I simply adjourned the session, because the ruling stood on its own. Outside, cameras flashed, questions flew. Judge Rivera, were you concerned about perceived conflicts? My rulings are based solely on law, I replied evenly. No elaboration, no defensiveness. Inside the building, Jason waited near the exit. He didn't approach immediately. He let reporters clear first. Then he stepped closer. You were fair, he said quietly. I was lawful. I corrected gently. He nodded. That's what I meant. A pause. I needed to see that, he admitted. See what? That you wouldn't bend. There it was. The final insecurity. Not that I would outshine him, but that I might compromise. He needed reassurance that integrity wasn't negotiable, and now he had it. That evening, Amelia called again. He told me what you did, she said. What I did? He said you strengthened the ruling instead of weakening it. I smiled faintly. I applied the law. He respects you, she said softly. This time the word felt earned, not forced, not reactive. Respect born from consistency. Weeks passed, no new whispers, no new complaints. The Riverside case faded into routine follow-up, and something else faded too. The tension, not dramatically, not overnight, but steadily. Jason stopped overcompensating at dinners. He stopped measuring space. He stopped mentioning balance, because balance had stabilized, not because one of us shrank, but because neither of us did. One evening, months later, we all gathered again, not for a wedding, not for a crisis, just dinner. A simple, ordinary. Judge Harrison raised his glass casually. To family, he said. No titles, no hierarchy, just family, and for the first time that word felt uncomplicated. Later, as I drove home, I reflected on everything: the text message, the dinner revelation, the anonymous complaint, the apology, the courtroom test. And I realized something profound. The greatest revenge isn't exposure. It isn't humiliation. It isn't watching someone crumble. It's watching them grow, because growth forces reflection, and reflection reshapes character. Jason didn't become smaller, he became steadier. Amelia didn't lose her shine, she lost her fear. And I didn't have to fight to be respected. And I didn't have to fight to be respected. I just had to remain consistent. People often think power shifts loudly, with dominance. But real power shifts quietly. When insecurity dissolves, when silence becomes strategy, when integrity refuses to bend, and when truth arrives unannounced and stays. It wasn't about being called Your Honor. It wasn't about the complaint. It wasn't even about the case. It was about this: never shrink yourself to protect someone else's insecurity, and never attack someone to protect your own. Because in the end, titles fade, positions change, public opinion shifts, but character echoes long after the room resets. And that echo is louder than any introduction ever could be. After the Riverside ruling, something subtle changed. Not in the headlines, not in the courtroom, not even at family dinners. It changed inside me. For years, I had built my strength in silence. I let people underestimate me, let them mislabel me, let them fill in the blanks with their own assumptions. And when the truth surfaced at that engagement dinner, it felt like justice. But justice isn't the same as peace. Peace takes longer. The weeks after the case were unusually calm. No ethics calls, no awkward confrontations, no whispered tensions at family gatherings. Jason had softened, not dramatically, but noticeably. He asked thoughtful questions now, not about prestige, but about responsibility. "What's the hardest part of sentencing?" he asked once over dinner. "Knowing that no decision feels light," I replied. He listened, actually listened, and Amelia noticed. She squeezed my hand under the table once when he did. A quiet thank you, not for winning, for staying steady. But peace has a strange side effect. When external conflict fades, internal questions grow louder. One night, I sat alone on my balcony, city lights flickering below, and asked myself something I had avoided for years. Why did I choose silence in the first place? Not at dinner, not at the wedding, but growing up. Why did I shrink into the quiet one? Was it protection? Or was it avoidance today? There's a difference. Protection preserves you. Avoidance hides you. And for the first time, I wondered if maybe I had done both. I thought back to childhood. Amelia performing piano recitals, family applauding, me standing slightly behind, content to observe, teachers praising her leadership, me praised for being well behaved, and somewhere along the way, I accepted that role. Not forced, not demanded, just absorbed. It was easier not to compete, easier not to need attention, easier to let her shine. But here's what no one tells you about being the quiet one: you still feel the comparison. You just don't fight it. And maybe that's why her text message hit so deeply. "We can't have you embarrassing us," because it confirmed something old: that I was safest when unseen. The irony: the moment I was seen, truly seen, everything shifted. Not because I demanded attention, but because I stopped hiding. That realization unsettled me. Because hiding had become comfortable. And growth rarely is. High profile, defer, televised. The topic: integrity under public scrutiny. Integrity under public scrutiny. The timing almost made me laugh. I hesitated before accepting. Public speaking was never my strength. I was composed in court, but that's different. Courtrooms are structured, predictable. Conferences are personal, visible. And visibility has always been complicated for me. Amelia called the night before my speech. "You are going to be amazing," she said confidently. "I'm not sure about that," I admitted. She laughed softly. "You stood in a courtroom full of cameras and didn't flinch. You'll be fine." That was different. How? I was representing the law. Tomorrow, I'm representing myself. She paused. Maybe it's time you stop separating those two. That sentence stayed with me. Because maybe she was right. Maybe I had hidden behind professionalism long enough. The conference hall was packed: lawyers, judges, journalists. Lights bright enough to erase shadows. When my name was announced, applause echoed politely. I walked to the podium, heart steady, breath controlled, and for a moment I considered playing it safe. Delivering prepared remarks, sticking to policy language. But something shifted inside me. Maybe growth had reached me too. So instead, I told a story, not about the wedding directly, not about the complaint, but about perception, about how titles influence behavior, about how silence can be mistaken for weakness, and how integrity must stand independent of applause. The room grew still. Not performative stillness, attentive stillness. Attentive stillness. And for the first time, I didn't feel like the quiet one. I felt present, unhidden. After the speech, several attendees approached me. Compliments, questions, handshakes, but one comment stood out. A young law student, nervous but determined, said, "Thank you for saying that you don't have to announce your strength for it to be real." I smiled, because that line wasn't in my notes, it came from experience. And hearing it reflected back to me felt like closure. Later that evening, I met Amelia and Jason for dinner. Not formal, not treaty-ic, just casual. When I arrived, Amelia hugged me tightly. "I watched the live stream," she said. "You were powerful." I almost corrected her, but then I didn't. Because maybe I was. Jason nodded in agreement. "You spoke without attacking anyone," he said thoughtfully. "That's rare. It's effective," I replied. He smiled faintly. "I'm starting to understand that." Dinner was easy. No tension, no measuring, no hidden agendas. And halfway through, Jason said something unexpected. "I used to think influence was about visibility," he admitted. "Now I think it's about steadiness." I looked at him carefully. "That's a difficult lesson to learn," I said. "It is," he agreed. "And sometimes it requires being unsettled first." We both knew what he meant. And for the first time, the memory of that anonymous complaint didn't carry weight, it carried context. Growth rarely begins in comfort. Months passed. Family gatherings became lighter, not because titles disappeared, but because they no longer dominated the room. Amelia stopped introducing me as my sister who's a judge. She simply said, "This is Stella," and that felt bigger than any formal acknowledgement. Because it meant I wasn't a symbol anymore. I was a person. One evening, while helping my parents prepare dinner, my father said something quietly. "You know, what?" he began, chopping vegetables slowly. "We never meant to compare you girls." "I know," I replied. "But we did," he admitted. I paused. "Honesty from parents is rare. We thought praise would motivate," he continued. "We didn't realize it might divide." I placed a hand on his arm gently. "It's okay," I said. And I meant it. Because healing doesn't require blame. It requires awareness. Later that night, I reflected on the full arc of everything: the text message, the dinner reveal, the ethics complaint, the courtroom test, the speech. And I realized something important. Revenge wasn't the point. Exposure wasn't the point. Even validation wasn't the point. Even validation wasn't the point. The point was integration. For years, I separated myself: professional self, family self, quiet self. And when those pieces collided publicly, it forced alignment. I could no longer hide parts of myself to keep peace. Peace built on hiding isn't peace. It's tension delayed. Amelia and I grew closer after that. Not because we erased history, but because we acknowledged it. We talked more openly. About insecurity, about expectations, about fear of comparison. And sometimes we laughed at how dramatic everything once felt. But beneath the laughter was gratitude. Because not every family survives ego shifts. Not every marriage adjusts to shared strength. And not every quiet pay person learns to step forward. 1 year after that engagement dinner, we gathered again at the same restaurant. Not for a formal event, just dinner. The lighting was the same. the silverware just as polished. But the energy ID completely different. No tension, no hierarchy, just conversation. Halfway through the meal, Judge Harrison raised his glass. To growth, he said calmly. Everyone echoed the toast, and I caught Amelia's eye across the table. She smiled, not nervously, not defensively, just warmly. And in that moment, I understood something fully. The most powerful shift that night wasn't when I was called, Your Honor. It was when we stopped measuring worth against each other. Because titles command attention, but character commands memory. And when the spotlight fades, memory is what remains. Looking back now, if someone asked me what changed everything, I wouldn't say it was that dinner, or the complaint, or the case. I would say it was the decision not to shrink, not to retaliate, not to dominate, but to remain steady, present, unhidden. Because sometimes the strongest revenge is simply refusing to disappear, and sometimes the deepest justice is watching insecurity transform into respect. Not forced, not demanded, earned. And that kind of respect, it doesn't echo for a moment. It echoes for a lifetime. A year ago, I was the sister who was told not to attend a rehearsal dinner. A year ago, I was the potential embarrassment. A year ago, my existence was considered a liability. And now, I was being asked to give a toast. Not because of my title, not because of prestige, but because Amelia wanted me to. It was their 1-year anniversary celebration. Small gathering. Close family. A few friends. Nothing extravagant. No politics. No business alliances. Just people who mattered. And when Amelia called to ask if I would say a few words, her voice didn't carry anxiety. It carried trust. I want you to speak, she said simply. Are you sure? I asked. I'm very sure. There was no hesitation, and that mattered more than she probably understood. The event was held at their home this time. Not a polished restaurant, not neutral territory, their space. Warm lights, soft music, laughter flowing easily between rooms. I arrived early, as usual. Jason greeted me at the door. No tension, no measuring, just a genuine smile. Glad you're here, he said. And I believed him. Inside, Amelia hugged me tightly. You don't have to make it formal, she whispered. Just speak from you. From me. Not from the bench. Not from authority. That was new. As the evening unfolded, I watched them carefully. Not critically. Not critically. Just observantly. They move differently now. Less performance. More partnership. He refilled her glass without being asked. She teased him without defensiveness. There was ease, the kind that only comes after friction has been worked through honestly. And I realized something. Their marriage had been tested early. By insecurity, by comparison, by pride. But it survived because they chose growth over ego. Not everyone does. Later in the evening, Jason's father approached me quietly. You handled that first year with more grace than most would, he said. I handled it the only way I knew how, I replied. He nodded, there's strength in restraint. I learned that a long time ago, I said. He studied me for a moment. You know, he added. Jason respects you deeply now. Now, that word held history. I respect him too, I said honestly, because growth deserves acknowledgement. Even if it comes late. When it was time for the toast, the room quieted. Glasses paused midair. Conversations softened, and I stood. For a brief second, I felt the ghost of that engagement dinner. The hush. The evaluation, the shift. But this time, it wasn't heavy. It was reflective. I won't make this long, I began smiling lightly. Soft laughter. 1 year ago, I sat at a dinner table that changed more than any of us expected. A few knowing smiles appeared. Amelia's eyes glistened slightly. And what I learned that night wasn't about titles, or status, or who holds what position. I paused. It was about how easy it is to misunderstand someone when we don't ask questions. The room grew still. Sometimes we fill silence with assumptions, I continued. Sometimes we protect our insecurities by labeling others. Jason lowered his gaze briefly. Not in shame, in recognition, but what I saw this year, I added, was something stronger than insecurity. I looked at both of them. I saw humility. I saw accountability. I saw two people choose growth instead of pride. Amelia's hand tightened around Jason's. And that, I finished softly, is what makes a marriage resilient. I lifted my glass. To partnership. Not competition. Not competition. The room echoed the toast. To partnership. And as glasses clinked, I felt something settle fully inside me. Closure, not dramatic, not explosive, just complete. After the toast, Amelia hugged me longer than usual. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For not giving up on me. I smiled gently. Sisters don't give up, I said. We just recalibrate. She laughed softly through tears. Later that night, as guests thinned out and the music lowered, Jason approached me again. You could have humiliated me in that speech, he admitted. But you didn't. I wasn't trying to win, I replied. He nodded. That's what I didn't understand before. I thought everything was about winning. And now, it's about standing. That word again, standing. Not above, not below, just steady. Driving home that night, I reflected on the full circle. The original text message, the dinner revelation, the anonymous complaint, the anonymous complaint, the apology, the growth, and now this, an invitation, trust. It would have been easy to become bitter, to hold on to that first humiliation, to use my position to subtly remind them of the shift. But bitterness corrodes the person holding it, and I had worked too hard to build stability to let resentment shake it. A few weeks later, something unexpected happened. I received another call from the ethics board. For a second, I felt the old tension flicker, but this time, the tone was different. We'd like to invite you to join the advisory panel, the chairperson said. Based on how you handled the Riverside situation, I blinked slightly. An advisory panel? Yes, for developing clearer guidelines on perceived conflicts. The irony almost made me smile. The complaint meant to destabilize me had positioned me as a voice in shaping policy. I accepted, not triumphantly, just steadily. Because influence, when earned quietly, carries more weight than influence demanded. Loudly. When I told Amelia and Jason, their reactions weren't complicated, they were proud. Openly. And this time, the pride didn't feel delayed. It felt shared. Jason even joked lightly. Guess I helped by accidentally stress testing the system. I laughed. Let's not make that a habit. No plans to, he assured me. And I believed him. As months turned into another year, the story became less dramatic, less sharp, more integrated. Family gatherings weren't charged anymore. My career wasn't minimized, but it also wasn't spotlighted unnecessarily. It simply existed, alongside everyone else's, balanced. And that balance wasn't fragile. It was earned. One evening, Amelia and I sat alone on her porch, the sky fading into deep blue. You know what's funny, she said thoughtfully. What? I used to think you were intimidating. I raised an eyebrow. I barely spoke. That's what made it worse, she admitted with a laugh. You were calm, certain. I thought you were judging all of us. I smiled gently. I wasn't judging. I know that now. She paused. I think I was judging myself. That honesty mattered. Because insecurity rarely originates from others. Because insecurity rarely originates from others, it grows from internal doubt. And when she understood that, everything shifted naturally. Looking back now, I don't see that engagement dinner as humiliation. I see it as revelation. It ailed assumptions. It revealed fear. It revealed strength. And most importantly, it revealed who we all were under pressure. Because pressure doesn't create character, it exposes it. And what was exposed that night? Averred. Not rivalry, not cruelty. Just insecurity searching for stability. If someone asked me today what the real revenge was, I would tell them this. It wasn't the silence when I was called Your Honor. It wasn't the complaint being dismissed. It wasn't the courtroom ruling. It wasn't even the toast. The real revenge was refusing to shrink into the role someone assigned me, and refusing to attack when they felt threatened. Because when you stay steady long enough, the room adjusts. People adjust. And sometimes, they grow. The last time we gathered at that original restaurant, I noticed something small but meaningful. The waiter asked how we knew each other. Amelia smiled and said simply, Flabjo, she's my sister. No titles, no qualifiers, no hesitation. Just sister. Just sister. No qualifiers, no hesitation. Just sister. And somehow that felt bigger than any introduction I've ever received, because titles command respect, but relationships command belonging. And belonging is what I was protecting all along. If you've ever been underestimated, if you have ever been told to be smaller to make someone else comfortable, if you've ever stayed quiet just to keep peace, remember this: silence is power, but only when it's chosen, not when it's forced. And the moment you decide to stand fully in who you are, without arrogance, without apology, without shrinking, that's when the real shift happens, not just in the room. And once you shift inside, no one can reposition you again. There's something strange about being underestimated. At first, it feels insulting, then it feels motivating. And eventually, it becomes familiar. For most of my life, I was comfortable being underestimated. It gave me space. It gave me privacy. It gave me room to build without interference. But after everything that happened, the dinner, the complaint, the courtroom, the reconciliation, I started to understand something deeper. Being unseen protects you, but being seen transforms you, and transformation has consequences. About 18 months after that engagement dinner, I received a letter, handwritten, from the young law student who had approached me after my conference speech. Her name was Lila, ADS. She wrote about how she nearly dropped out of law school, how she felt overshadowed by louder classmates, how she felt pressure to be more aggressive, more dominant, more visible. But when you said strength doesn't have to announce itself, she wrote, I felt like I finally had permission to succeed in my own way. I read that letter 3 times because I never set out to inspire anyone. I set out to survive comparison. And somehow, survival became influence. That realization shifted something in me. For years, I thought leadership looked like command. But now I was beginning to see it differently. Leadership can also look like steadiness. Leadership can also look like steadiness, like restraint, like quiet consistency. And maybe the reason that engagement dinner changed everything wasn't because of a title. It was because the truth arrived without performance. It simply stood there and refused to shrink. Around that time, Amelia invited me to lunch. Just the two of us, no agenda, no tension. But when we sat down, I could tell something was on her mind. I've been thinking about kids, she said softly. I smiled. That's exciting. It is, she agreed. But it's also terrifying. Why? She hesitated. Because I don't want to repeat what we grew up with. That caught me off guard. What do you mean? I don't want one child to feel like the golden one, she said, and the other to feel like the quiet one. Her voice carried sincerity. I don't want comparison to be their language. That moment felt bigger than any apology she had ever given me, because it meant she didn't just regret the past, she wanted to change the future. You won't repeat it, I said gently. How do you know? Because you're aware of it. Awareness breaks patterns. Denial reinforces them. She nodded slowly. I want them to know who they are without competing. I smiled faintly. That's all anyone really wants. Later that evening, I found myself thinking about legacy, not the legal kind, not rulings or panels or policies. Personal legacy. What does it mean to leave something better than you found it? I've eaten for my parents. Legacy meant stability. For Amelia, it once meant admiration. For Jason, it meant influence. For me, consistency under pressure. The ability to stand firm without standing above. And maybe, just maybe, the courage to be fully seen. A few months later, Amelia called with news. She was pregnant. Her voice trembled with excitement. Her voice trembled with excitement, and when she told me she wanted me to be the godmother, I didn't hesitate, Wed. Yes, I said instantly. Because that role isn't ceremonial. It's relational. It's a promise. and I intended to keep it. The day her daughter was born, I stood in the hospital room watching Amelia hold her tiny hand. Jason stood beside her, softer than I'd ever seen him. Judge Harrison waited quietly near the window. No hierarchy, no pride. When Amelia looked at me and said, "Meet your goddaughter," something inside me shifted permanently. This wasn't about titles anymore. This was about example. Children learn not from what we say, but from how we stand. As her daughter grew, I visited often, not as Judge Rivera, just Aunt Stella. We read books together, built towers, colored outside the lines. And one afternoon, when she was barely 3, she asked me a simple question. "What do you do?" I paused. I paused. "I help people solve problems," I said gently. She nodded like that made perfect sense, and maybe it did. She nodded like that made perfect sense, and maybe it did. Because at its core, that's what integrity does. It solves problems without creating new ones. Years earlier, I might have avoided being present like this, kept distance, maintained boundaries too strictly. But something had changed. The wall between professional and personal wasn't gone, but it wasn't defensive anymore. It was healthy, chosen, not reactionary. One evening, as Amelia and I watched her daughter play in the yard, she said something quietly. "You know what I realized?" "What?" "I was never embarrassed by you." I raised an eyebrow. I was embarrassed by my own insecurity. That kind of clarity doesn't come easily. "I'm glad you figured that out," I said. "So am I," she replied. Because once insecurity is named, it loses power, and what once threatened to divide us now felt like a shared lesson. Jason changed too. Not dramatically, but steadily. He stopped measuring influence in volume, stopped referencing status unnecessarily. He became more grounded, more present. And one day he admitted something unexpected. "You didn't just change the room that night," he said. "You changed me." I didn't respond immediately, because transformation isn't something you claim, it's something you witness over time. And I had witnessed his. Professionally, my role expanded. The advisory panel work led to clearer guidelines across our district. Conflict of interest reviews became more transparent, less vulnerable to manipulation. And quietly, I knew something important. The complaint that once aimed to destabilize me had strengthened the system. Sometimes opposition refines structure. Sometimes insecurity sharpens clarity. But only if you respond without ego. One afternoon, Lila, the law student who wrote to me, sent another message. She had passed the bar. She credited discipline over dominance, steadiness over spectacle, and she said something that stayed with me. "You showed me I didn't have to be loud to be strong." That's when I understood something fully. The quiet one isn't weak. The quiet one is often observing, building, waiting for the right moment. And when that moment comes, it doesn't explode. It aligns. Looking back at that original engagement dinner now feels almost surreal. The fork dropping, the silence, the whisper of "Judge." It once felt seismic. Now it feels like a beginning. Because what happened that night wasn't humiliation, it was exposure. Exposure of assumption, exposure of pride, exposure of truth. And exposure is uncomfortable, but necessary. If someone were to ask me today what changed my family dynamic, I wouldn't say a title. I would say visibility. The moment I stopped protecting others by hiding parts of myself. The moment Amelia confronted her fear instead of disguising it. The moment Jason realized influence doesn't require dominance. And the moment we all chose growth over ego. That's what shifted everything. Life isn't cinematic most days. It's ordinary. Dinners, phone calls, birthdays. But underneath ordinary moments lie patterns. And patterns either repeat or evolve. Our family chose evolution. Not perfectly, not instantly, but intentionally. But intentionally. A few years later, we returned again to that same restaurant, this time for my parents' anniversary. Same lighting, same polished silverware, but no tension, no measuring, no silent calculations, just warmth. Halfway through dinner, Amelia's daughter dropped her fork. It clinked against her plate, and for a second, everyone froze. Then we all burst into laughter, because memory had transformed from sharp to soft. And that's how healing looks. Not erased, just reshaped. As I drove home that night, I realized something final. Being called Your Honor in that room didn't change who I was, it revealed who I had already become. The real transformation happened afterward, in how I responded, in how we all responded, in how we all responded. And if there's one lesson I carry forward, it's this. You don't need to announce your strength. You don't need to diminish others to protect it, and you don't need to seek revenge when composure speaks louder. Because the most powerful shift isn't when a room goes silent, it's when the silence turns into understanding, and understanding turns into respect, and respect turns into legacy. Not the kind written in law books, but the kind written into relationships, the kind that teaches the next generation not to compete for worth, but to stand confidently in it. And that kind of legacy, it doesn't need a title. It just needs truth. If you had walked into that restaurant the night of my sister's engagement dinner, you would have thought it was a normal celebration. Soft lighting, carefully arranged tables, conversations polished, like the silverware. You would have seen a bride-to-be glowing with anticipation, a fiancé proud of his family's name, a quiet sister sitting near the end of the table. You would not have known that one sentence was about to shift everything. Judge Rivera. 2 words. That's all it took. But here's what I understand now, years later. It wasn't the title that changed the room, it was the truth behind it, and the way I chose to stand in it, and the way I chose to stand in it. When people ask me what the real turning point was, they expect drama. They expect confrontation. They expect some cinematic moment where I finally won. But real growth doesn't look like winning, it looks like alignment. That night, I didn't expose anyone. I didn't humiliate my sister. I didn't retaliate against Jason. I didn't retaliate against Jason. I didn't even defend myself. I simply didn't shrink, and that was enough. There's a difference between revenge and resolution. Revenge seeks to balance pain. Resolution seeks to end it. I could have chosen revenge. I could have made sharp remarks at dinner. I could have escalated the ethics complaint. I could have forced Jason into public embarrassment. But revenge would have satisfied my ego. Resolution strengthened my character. And character outlasts ego every time. Over the years, that dinner became less of a story and more of a lesson. At family gatherings, it's occasionally referenced jokingly. Remember when we didn't know Stella was a judge? Laughter follows. Not awkward laughter, warm laughter, because the tension that once lived in that memory no longer controls it. We reclaimed it. We grew past it, and growth always feels quieter than conflict. Amelia became the kind of mother she once hoped to be. She praises her daughter without comparison. She celebrates effort, not hierarchy. And when her daughter asks what I do, Amelia answers simply, she helps people. No title necessary. That small shift means everything. Because we learned that identity isn't something you weaponize, it's something you honor. Jason evolved too. He now speaks about influence differently. Less about status, more about responsibility. He mentors young professionals without measuring them against himself. He listens more than he talks. And sometimes, when we sit across from each other at dinner, I see the quiet understanding in his eyes. He once feared losing balance. Now he understands balance isn't about standing higher. It's about standing steady. As for me, I no longer hide behind silence, but I also don't abandon it. Silence is powerful when it's chosen, not when it's forced by insecurity or fear. I speak when it matters. I stay quiet when it doesn't. And that distinction changed my life. Because shrinking and restraint are not the same thing. One is self-erasure. The other is discipline. And I learned to tell the difference. If I could speak to the version of myself sitting at that engagement dinner, hands folded, aware of every subtle judgment in the room, I would tell her this. You don't owe anyone an explanation for your strength. You don't need to announce your accomplishments to make them real. And you don't need to compete for space that already belongs to you. The room will reset, not because you demand it, but because truth has a way of rearranging furniture quietly. The irony of it all, that dinner was supposed to measure importance. Instead, it revealed insecurity. It exposed assumptions. It tested integrity. And ultimately, it strengthened relationships that might have remained fragile forever. Because sometimes tension is necessary, sometimes the fracture reveals the weakness in the foundation, and sometimes that crack allows light in. Years later, I was invited to speak again at another conference. This time, the topic wasn't ethics, it was leadership. And someone in the audience asked me a question I didn't expect. What's the most powerful moment of your career? I could have said a landmark ruling, a complex case, a policy reform. But I didn't. I said the most powerful moment of my career wasn't in a courtroom. It was at a dinner table. The room laughed softly, then grew curious. Because that was the moment I learned that composure under pressure, speaks louder than authority. I paused. And that integrity doesn't need an audience. It just needs consistency. That answer felt truer than any legal argument I've ever made. There's something else I understand now. When someone underestimates you, it says more about their fear than your value. And when you respond without bitterness, you give them space to confront that fear. Not everyone takes that space, but the ones who do, they grow. My sister grew. Jason grew. Even I grew. Because I had to confront my own habit of hiding. Growth isn't one-sided. It's shared. Sometimes people ask if I ever resented Amelia for that text message, the one that said, "Don't come to the rehearsal. We can't have you embarrassing us." And the honest answer is this. For a moment, yes. But resentment is heavy, and I've carried enough weight in courtrooms. I didn't need to carry it at home. Forgiveness didn't excuse the message. It transformed it. That text became the catalyst. The spark. The beginning of a shift none of us expected. If there's truth this story leaves behind, it's this. Your worth does not decrease because someone fails to recognize it. Silence does not mean insignificance. And humility is not weakness. The world often confuses volume with value, but volume fades. Consistency remains, and consistency builds something louder than applause. It builds trust. That engagement dinner began with hierarchy, with status, with whispered respect for a title, but it ended with something far stronger. Perspective, and perspective changes how you see everything. Now, when I walk into rooms, courtrooms, conferences, family dinners, I don't wonder how I'm being evaluated. I don't measure posture or tone. I don't anticipate comparison. I simply stand, present, whole, unhidden, because the quiet sister no longer fears being seen, and the golden sister no longer fears sharing light. There's enough room for both. There always was. A few months ago, Amelia's daughter asked me something while we were baking cookies together. "Aunt Stella," she said seriously, "are you important?" Children ask the purest questions. I looked at her flower-covered hands and smiled. "I try to be helpful," I said. She thought about that, then nodded. "Helpful is important." And just like that, everything made sense. Titles are loud. Status is temporary, but being helpful, being steady, being someone off, Earth can rely on a divot. That's importance that doesn't fade. If you've listened this far, maybe you felt something familiar. Maybe you've been underestimated. Maybe someone tried to shrink you to protect their comfort. Maybe you've stayed silent longer than you should have. Let me tell you this. You don't need to explode to be powerful. You don't need to expose someone to prove your worth. You don't need revenge to feel validated. And sometimes the strongest response is calm consistency. Sometimes the greatest shift happens when you simply refuse to disappear. And sometimes, all it takes to reset a room is standing fully in who you are, without apology, without arrogance, without fear. The night I was called, Your Honor, the room went silent. But the real story wasn't in that silence. It was in what followed: growth, accountability, balance, and a family that learned to see each other clearly. Because when truth enters a room, unannounced, it doesn't just change perception, it invites reflection. And reflection? Reflection changes everything. So here's the lesson I carry with me, long after the silverware was cleared and the whispers faded. Never shrink yourself to fit someone else's insecurity. Never weaponize your strength to prove a point. And never mistake quiet for weakness, because when you remain steady long enough, the room resets. And this time, it sees you clearly.